Welcome to the International Cultural Relations Research Alliance, or ICRRA's 2023 conference, towards more sustainable development, multilateral organizations, and cultural relations in the 2030 Agenda and beyond. I'm Venka Purushothaman, a member of ICRRA Network and Deputy President and Provost at LASALLE, University of the Arts, Singapore. I'm the moderator of this panel session. This is the first in a number of online sessions taking place as part of the conference. We are delighted to have you with us for the first panel discussion, the value of multilateral organizations in a 2030 and post-2030 SDG environment. Before I introduce our panelists, let me briefly describe ICRRA and our overall aims for this conference. The ICRRA network brings together global research and insight into theory and practice of cultural relations. When we talk about cultural relations, we are specifically talking about ways of working internationally in arts, education, and civil society to build trust and understanding, promote collaboration, and enhance and sustain dialogue between people and cultures. So with this conference, we are aiming to put our network's knowledge about cultural relations into dialogue with experts on multilateralism and sustainable development. We are doing this in the context of the UN Agenda 2030 and the UN Summit of the Future's call for more effective multilateralism. We are hoping that our talks and discussions over the course of the conference and this panel will help us better understand how cultural relations can support multilateral and regional organizations to deliver sustainable development. We are glad to have you on board and to be part of these discussions. Please post your questions, comments, and reflections in the Q&A box as we go along, and we'll aim to cover as many of these as possible at the end of the session. You may also, ask specific questions of our speakers. So without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted that ICRRA has assembled a wonderful panel of eminent individuals for the first session. They are with me, Pablo Rafael de la Madrid, Jordi Pascual, Ouafa Belgacem, Olesia Otrevskova Luita. The way we will be organizing this panel discussion, which is themed on the value of multilateral organizations in a 2030 and post-2030 SDG environment, is each of the speakers will speak for about between 5 to 7 minutes. And after each speaker, we will open up the floor for a dialogue, a conversation. So the whole aim of this is to really discuss and really nut out and assemble a series of interventions to understanding multilateralism and sustainable development in relation to cultural relations. So the first speaker of this panel session, I would like to welcome Pablo Rafael de la Madrid, former Director General of International Affairs at the Mexico Ministry of Culture, and who is currently the Director General of Cultural Promotion and Festivals of the Secretary of Culture of Mexico. In 2018, he served as the cultural advisor of the Mexican Embassy in Portugal. Between 2013 and 2017, he was the cultural advisor to the Embassy of Mexico and director of the Cultural Institute of Mexico in Spain. And he was director and founder of the Cultural Center El October Dia. A narrator, essayist, and a diplomat, he was the executive coordinator of the UNESCO's World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development held in Montreal in 2022, which many of us were part of. So now over to you, Pablo.
Thank you very much, Venka, and it's a pleasure to be here with all these colleague fellows and good friends. First, I would like to answer the two questions that you already set us. How do multilateral organizations focusing on culture engage with increasing and diversified divergent global environment? And the second question, it was, what's the role of the multilateral organization, especially related to the next agenda, post-2030 agenda, and the setting the goal for culture. The answers to these questions are: first, what we have to do. First, talk to strangers. The idea of building new cultural policies related to multilateral organizations is first to understand that all cultural agencies or agents or artists or creators that doesn't build a relationship with other sectors that we never speak. Cultural agents always speak between each other, between us, but it's rarely to speak with the outside agencies or members of the system, for example, in the United Nations, that we never speak to. So first, we need to speak, for example, to start a conversation between regions. My experience in Mundiacult told that we rarely speak between regions. I just was having a conversation with Ouafa before starting this conversation, and we were talking about how to build a relationship between, for example, Latin America and Africa. No, if we don't speak between strangers and we don't meet each other and start to work together, it could be harder for the multilateral organizations to set the next agenda to come. Speak to strangers also means to speak with other government agencies, cultural ministries, if they don't speak with finance ministries or economic ministries or health organizations. The pandemic just showed us how culture is a fantastic tool for public health, and that's a good lesson. It's another way to see how we have to speak to strangers. We have to speak the language of finance. We have to speak the language of economy. We have to speak to the banks. We have to speak with other agencies. So the first answer is to speak to strangers and build a new way of communicate between agents and multilateral organizations that can allow us to build a new way of working in daily basis. The second answer, especially related to multilateral agencies, is speaking or start to have a conversation inside. The way that the multilateral organization, especially the UN system, are designed that was designed in the 40s, and now we are living in a very speedy world. So this kind of organization must understand that they are like big elephants with very weak feet or foots. So the second thing is that how to start to think how to reform the multilateral organizations and how to open the participation in that organization to the social, to the ONGs and the civil groups. When we started to work in Mundiacult, our first thought it was how to organize a global conference with the participation of all communities, creators, artists, and social and civil groups. So we understood that the idea of organizing an event, it wasn't the same that the idea that of organizing a process. So heading the future, if we don't think in process, and the third answer is that if we don't set an agenda and a time that help to develop the job of the multilateral organization, especially UNESCO and UN in the agenda of culture, it's not going to be possible to achieve a goal of culture in the next post-2030 agenda. The example is here. For example, the CGLO, the UCLG that Jordi is heading, it helps to Mundiacult to set the commitment of building a global goal for culture in the next agenda to come. It wasn't the organization of UNESCO multilateral agenda. It wasn't a civil organization. It wasn't a group of a big movement that set this goal in the main conclusion of Mundiacult. So in the months to come and the years to come to set this agenda, it's not possible to think in the multilateral organization without the participation of the rest and without the setting the idea of build this path together. In a few weeks ago, in the Summit of the Future, also the organizations managed to set the cultural agenda in the paragraph 16 and the final declaration that it was the next step to the next way of setting the 2030 goal. And it wouldn't be possible without the participation of all the sectors. The agenda of Mundiacult also leaves us a big task or homework to do in the months to come, especially related to create indicators related to create the Mundiacult. It has been past about 40 years to have this kind of meetings. Now Mundiacult, thanks to the process and the participation, not just related to the multilateral organization, but also with the participation of of the citizens, we are now having the possibility to have this meeting very often. The next one, I believe, is going to be in 2025. There are many candidates to trying to organize that, but that was another success of the pressure of the civilians in that path. So I leave it here. I think for the months to come, this kind of spaces, but especially the way the need to find possibilities to speak between regions in order to set this goal, it will be the most important homework to do to really get this cultural goal for the next agenda post 2030. Thank you very much.
Really, appreciate the points that you have raised. But first, I must thank you for, bringing to highlight the two questions that I had posed, which I should have actually introduced to our participants and members who are here. And just to reiterate the two questions that all the panel members are speaking to in some form, in some ways, is first, how do multilateral organizations focusing on culture engage with an increasingly diversified and divergent global environment? And you rightfully talked about the need to come together to the table, to have a conversation, and how do we bring people to the table and appreciate the multiple diverse contexts that they bring into that particular space, and how do we all come together to build a common future. The second question that our panelists will also be addressing is the role of multilateral organizations in the post-2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, specifically the standalone goal for culture, which Pablo, you spoke about quite effectively at the end. I'll come back to those points together with the questions that members in the audience will raise. But I would like to now invite Pasquale, Jordi Pasquale, to speak. And to introduce Jordi Pasquale, he's the founding coordinator of the Culture Committee of the World Organization of United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG, and a member of the Global Campaign Culture 2030 goal that advocates for a standalone SDG in the culture goal. He has published books, articles, and reports on cultural rights, international cultural relations, culture and sustainability, and the governance of culture, which has been translated into more than 20 languages. So it's my absolute delight to welcome Jordi Pascual. Over to you, Jordi.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Venka, for this very generous introduction. And thank you to the ICRRA for this invitation. I feel very honored by this invitation. I will use this PowerPoint in order to try to, if not answer explicitly the two questions, to provide the basis for the debate and implicitly answer the two questions of this panel. First, let me share with you something that many of you have probably already seen in our presentations, in our activism. The frame of sustainable development as it was historically conceived in the 1980s does not explain reality as it should anymore. We believe that with all the precautions, the frame to the right explains reality better. And we dislike the concept of pillar. We better talk about spheres, bridges, dimensions, but we believe that this explains reality better and empowers cultural actors with something that it is useful. And let me also say that it is a simplification of reality by all means, as all paradigms. Let me say that this image, this narrative, has been unfolded with Culture 21 Actions, a toolkit that we have co-created with our members and approved in 2015, which we unfold the 100 concrete questions. We unfold with our members, detecting weaknesses, strengths, but most especially creating capacity at a local level so that culture is related to health policies, to urban planning policies, to education policies, to tourism policies, something that perhaps at the ministerial level is very difficult, but that at a local level is a must. And we in UCLG, we have the duty to serve the cultural officials in cities and to give them the tools so that they can relate to their colleagues in other areas, considering the human rights frame and the sustainable development frame. We are now preparing our new frame to be approved in 2025. Those that are interested, I can give more information later. Let me also, this will be shared with all members of the UCLG Culture Committee in 3 weeks in Dublin at our Culture Summit. We have homework. This is the second message I would like to share with you, similar to what Pablo just explained. We in UCLG, we have written a guide on culture in the SDGs. We have a database of good practices on culture in the SDGs by cities and local governments. We have several programs of capacity building, but we are aware that there is this difficult to summarize, but the fact that culture is seen as a solution. This is, we have never in UCLG, we have never said so. But you will probably agree that the narrative of cultural actors is mainly positive to the relation between culture and the SDGs, or culture in sustainable development. what we have analyzed in 2023 is that the cultural actors, the cultural institutions are involved in narratives that prevent the implementation of the SDGs. This has been summarized in this analysis of interactions. You have above the logos the positive interactions, and you have below the logos, below the 17 goals, the negative interactions. Processes, programs in which cultural actors or so-called cultural actors are involved that go against the achievement of the SDGs. And last but not least, Pablo Rafael was very generous in his presentation, a culture goal. We wrote a proposal in 2013, and very sadly, the result, the discussion that took place in June 2013 ended with the sentence, culture is not globable, not goalable. This was a tragedy for us in 2013. We have insisted, and it's not only UCLG, but it is the whole campaign Culture 2030 goal. We have been working together since 2013. It's the International Federation of Libraries, the International Council on Monuments and Sites, the Arterial Network Africa, Culture Action Europe, the International Music Council, and the International Federation of Coalitions for Cultural Diversity, together with UCLG, that we are in this Culture 2030 goal. We communicated to the Mexican government and to UNESCO that we were ready to release a proposal of a culture goal the day before the beginning of Mondiacult, and this is what we did. A proposal. We were very cautious. We consulted our membership. This was based on a survey and several webinars. Of course, not a closed proposal. How could it be closed? It's just the beginning. And we were accurate in writing wording that it is almost equally existing in today's SDGs. We are not asking for targets or indicators that mutatis mutandis do not exist today in SDGs. Certainly, we would embrace multilateral organizations to discuss this proposal, challenge this proposal, and make a sound proposal, perhaps in Mondiacult 2025, so that at the end of this Mondiacult 2025, it is endorsed in consensus by all cultural actors, nations, cities, civil society, as well as by those that feel owners or main contributors to the achievement of other goals. The feminist movement, the climate activists, the fighters for inequalities, if they do not see that the culture goal is also contributing to what they are aiming to achieve, then the culture goal would have not been well formulated. Let me finish with what UCLG committed to do in the UN SDG summit in September this year, now almost 1 month ago, a little bit more. A new multilateral system that cares for people, democracy, and our planet, and with culture explicitly recognized as a vector of creativity and transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jordi, for your presentation. It was truly illuminating, and you've given us much to think about. I do have quite a number of questions around your your presentation, which I'll come back at later in our conversation. But really, you do give us things to think about in terms of the kind of narratives that are emerging and being formulated that on one level prevents the realization of the SDGs. And at the same time, we are also caught by a need to embed the values that the SDGs represent in our everyday kind of activity within the cultural dimension. And I'll pick on those two key points with you later in our discussion. But thank you. But it also kind of nicely, segue from what Pablo had earlier spoken about in terms of how do you enrich people together to start having those conversations, and what kind of agency drives them in order to speak or not to speak, which could be quite interesting for our discussion later. But I'll invite our third speaker to the panel, and this is Ouafa Belgacem, right, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Culture Funding Watch. She's also a civil society manager at the Anna Lindh Foundation and the creative director at the Pan-African Chamber of Commerce. She's named among the 100 most influential creatives of African descent in 2021 and 500 most powerful Africans in 2022. In the Digital Africa program, she is the connector for the North Africa region. So we are absolutely delighted to hear her perspectives and share with us the context of understanding multilateralism from where she sits or stands from. Over to you, Ouafa.
Thank you, Venka, for the introduction, and thank you for the ICRRA for the invitation. I'm really, really pleased to be here. From where I stand, I think I could contribute to this conversation from the perspective of a global South, a small actor in that ecosystem, and how we relate to this multiculturalism, because from a reality for maybe not powerful player in different our sector, which is actually the majority. We represented in our ecosystem, we are the majority, but how we deal with this, how we feel about it. I'd like to share with you, I want to question the approach so far to multilateralism. The way I feel it, someone from the global South and in the sector for a while, I don't see in the discourse, in the narrative, questioning the power dynamic. If multilateralism does not question power dynamics, there will never be collaboration. We will never be together. And the discussion will never be constructive, because there will be always someone more powerful than the other. And the relationship will not be built on the right basis. And this is why, for example, I'm always still struggling to adopt this new narrative about fair cultural relations. Because fair cultural relation, for me, does not question the power dynamic, and they expect someone who is already powerful to be just nice to someone who is not powerful. And someone coming from the global South, it revolts me. It provokes me a lot, because that message that sent me is the best I can hope for, is you being nice to me and not me being equal to you. And if we are in equal relationship and equal discussion, the question even of fairness itself will not come, because we are among equal. So whether you like it or not, you have to be fair to me, because I am in the power to impose that fairness relationship. So that's where, that's one of the, I think the discussion has to really take place. And I feel that that issue has not really been discussed openly and with open heart and with pause. It's not opposing, it's just how we can figure out the way we question this. Again, related to, if we really want multilateralism to work, we really need also to consciously and more actively thinking about the approach and helping each other. Lots of approach. The principle of the do not do, whether you are the multilateral or helping the community, or how will we interact with each other, we still very not doing well when we talk about helping or the other or supporting the other. helping, keeping the other in this situation of trainees or apprentice for for somebody else, that is not like une relation saine, that it's not a sane relationship. Doing projects or coming with a support program that do not take into consideration the risk on preventing the maturity and the development of the local ecosystem, that it's not helping each other. I think when we go into multiculturalism or multilateralism, multi-relationship, the idea should be really the driver, should be helping or sustaining the other to be able to fix or to set his agenda or to implement or reach those goals by itself. And if that's not the drive, that you are not needed anymore, that it's not helping each other. And I don't see too much of this. I still see projects or say support that, okay, we're helping you growing a little bit. And that's not helping and building, and again, building trust on this relationship. And last but not least, I really don't want to be a lot. I want to listen more to the others because I'm sure they have much more to say than me. And I think we cannot have a conversation about multilateralism and setting goals together and going without recognizing that the concept and the legitimacy of multilateralism is shaken now by the Palestinian genocide. You take a huge part of the world is now questioning the partiality, the usefulness, the existence of such like arenas, mechanisms, and institutions. And I think I'm not questioning it myself, but I think this is something, a real problem we're having now. And the conversation in my region is now we see multilateral organization, multilateral space having double measures, having rules that applies only when it helps or when it's an advantage of a part and not the other. And that will directly impact in the cultural relationship. Sorry?
Yeah.
So that will really threatening those spaces. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against. I'm really advocate for it's needed. Multilateral spaces, multilateral cooperation, it's needed more than ever today. With what's happening now, we need to find neutral spaces where we agree and we support and work towards each other. And of course, the culture, and here my conclusion, the culture is a pillar of those discussions. And what's happening today, it's even more at the advantage of the role, what art and culture can do in such context, in such conflict. And I think to Jordi, to the rectangle you add, I think maybe the dimension of peace building, of really resolution of conflict should really be very well. And I think this is a great opportunity now, unfortunately, Yani, you know, there is always bad and good in everything that's happening, but that's a clear example what culture and arts can do in such context. And on that, I want to close on this note of hope that we are needed even in the worst cases and situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ouafa, for that very important and compelling, argument that you put forth, in the role of multilateralism and the power structures that are, necessarily embedded within the system. And I like the point that you talked about. How do we, create a mature system that, could sustain the other to set agenda and achieve their own goals. And that's an important sense of dimension that needs to emerge as we speak. I must apologize for the some background feedback that we got earlier. So if I could encourage all our audience members to put themselves on mute, that would really be helpful, right? But Ouafa, your presentation does nicely segue into what art can do to our final panelist, who would be able to speak to this particular topic. So it's my pleasure to welcome Olesia Ostrovska-Wita, who is the Director General of Ukraine's National Art and Culture Museum complex. And if I'm pronouncing it right, is the Maistetsky Arsenal. or the Art Arsenal. And this is Ukraine's flagship cultural institution that brings together various arts, from contemporary art, new music and theater, literature, and museum development. Olesia is also the board member of Warm City Platform for Initiatives and also a board member of the CDOS think tank in Kiev. So she does bring us some very important perspectives from where she is actually located. So over to you, Olesia.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Venka, for giving me the floor. I am honored and happy to be here in the company of the distinguished speakers. It was truly interesting to listen to your contributions. So let me pick up just where Ouafa has left, and she has just said that we are needed even in such situations. We have to show that we're needed even in such situations. So let me share you some of my own experience from my organization here in Kiev. And Art Arsenal is one of Ukraine's largest art institutions, right in the center of Kiev, which was besieged by Russian troops in March 2022. And I stayed in Kiev together with the larger part of my team here in the Art Arsenal, hoping to be useful all that time. There were a few reasons to stay in Kiev and to stay in your organization. And one of the most important reasons was to protect heritage and cultural practices connected to your institutions, because I'm sure you know that Russia is waging a neo-colonial war in Ukraine, refusing the right for Ukrainians to exist either symbolically or if needed physically as well. So what is the means that represents your existence? What is the means that shows that you are there, that your agency matters, and you actually exist as a society and as a human being? And that's culture to a great extent. Therefore, we thought that our activity, our presence is crucial and important. But once Russian troops retreated from Kiev, and that was April 2022. We gathered together with my colleagues here in the Art Arsenal and started to think about our mission. What is the mission of culture in the situation of extreme crisis, such as war? Why does a society which is waging war, why does that society, why would it think about culture even in such situation? And I have a few answers to that. So what are the missions, at least the missions of my organization here during the war? And the first is exactly to protect cultural heritage and cultural practices that represent your presence in the world. This is how you tell the world that you are there, that you exist. But second would be to raise the voice and tell other people what you are, what you stand for, where you come from. One thing that we learned here in Ukraine is that it's extremely hard to explain your experience. I'm sure you know from your own contexts. No journalism can explain what people are going through in certain places. You need certain physical experience to understand its essence. The only other possibility, not the physical experience, would be art, be it literature or contemporary visual art or music or theater. It's the closest we can get to the experience of another human being or another society. So in that sense, an organization in the midst of war is important, because this is how this organization helps other people to understand the experience of certain society or human being. And the third reason why cultural organizations are needed, or culture in general, even in the most crisis situation, is that it adds to resilience of its society. For example, through self-reflection. We as humans, we need to think about what happens to us, what our experience represents, and what our possible future might be. We need to think about it. And we also need to think about it collectively. We need to gather in one place. We need to sometimes even cry together or laugh together, which is also a possibility. And we need those places where we can do it. And those are places of culture. And just to give you a small picture of that, a small story, what it looked like. After Russians retreated from Kiev, we thought that we will create an exhibit, which was called, we couldn't come up with a name, so we just called it an exhibit about our feelings, about what we feel. And we did quite a small exhibition where we kind of represent our thoughts and feelings of what we've just come through together as a team of my institution. And after we opened an exhibit and welcomed the guest, the curator of the exhibit gave a tour. And during the tour, she told various stories about the institution and its experience. And after she finished the tour, she went out to the yard of our gallery, and the visitors of the gallery went with her and started to tell her their stories, because that resonated with them and people needed to talk about it. So this is why I call adding to the resilience of the society. You kind of share the experience. You need a shared place to reflect and to feel in a certain sense. You also have to understand that in Ukraine, the situation is very different in different places. It's not homogeneous situation with the same physical realities in every place. We have very different situations in very different cities. I am physically in Kiev right now, and Kiev is a target number one, but it's also very well protected by the air defense systems. We also have southern cities like Odessa or Kherson or Mykolaiv that are much closer to the front line, and it's very dangerous there. Just this night, there were bombardments in Odessa. It's a port on the Black Sea, and it's much harder to keep your institutions going. We have frontline cities where it's impossible to live, and also Western Ukrainian cities closer to Polish border where it's almost safe, in a way that you only the only threat there are air missiles, unlike artillery, drones, and troops on the ground in other places. So in all those places, situation is very different for institutions. When you look at the frontline places, there will be mostly human networks operating, you would have people doing the work to protect, but the further from front line you go, the more prominent role would go to official organizations or just organizations, all sorts of organizations. But anyhow, even to keep those network of people going, you still need organizations, right? Working with them. And this is one of our great challenges, because it's very hard to keep organizations working in war conditions. Also because of the mass migration and brain drain. You need people on the ground to do the work, supported by organizations, but it's hard to have this done in a situation of migration, evacuation, and all sorts of those things. So what can be done in this situation? If you look at such crisis situation, probably in other places too, but I will speak from my experience, which probably can be extrapolated on our other situations. So first of all, I think it's crucial to support local expertise through local organizations. Secondly, it's extremely important to help local organizations to avoid brain drain. Third, it's very important for all sorts of international multilateral organizations to be fast and be responsive, to prioritize speed over bureaucracy, which is almost impossible in international organizations. And that, I think, would help on a local level, even in situations such as we are or other crisis situations. So I'll leave it here, and I'm happy to answer more questions or to comment on further conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessia. I mean, for that sharing, and really, I think you brought together some real examples of how multilateralism itself is being challenged by not necessarily giving voice to the kind of the localized experiences that different places are experiencing, and I think you do highlight one key challenge of multilateralism is, and you eloquently said it, the need for speed over bureaucracy, and I think it's something that I want to actually invite Jordi to kind of respond to. In one of the key challenges of multilateral organizations, how they could provide for greater capacity for diverse voices to participate and be accessed in a much more rapid manner. I frame it in a way that multilateral organizations sometimes become very clunky and large and difficult to move and to be in action. And that's perhaps that's a perception that people might have. But at the same time, there's an opportunity for multilateralism to be mobilized very readily to support different communities in different ways. So perhaps, Jordi, I invite you to perhaps kind of respond to some of the things that Alessia has actually shared.
Wow, this is very difficult, Venka. This is very difficult. I am not sure I'm ready for that. Not sure I am entitled. What I can say is that we are not yet witnessing multilateral institutions engaging in in-depth conversations with cities, local governments, which I represent, and civil society, which I try to follow. But if you compare the situation, because you must always compare, I think that there is certainly progress. Not enough, for sure, not enough. I think that the concept of power, which was highlighted in the chat by Rajizar and very clearly mentioned by Ouafa in her presentation, is something that we have to be very aware. And in this, say, criticism of where we come from, the cultural actors, I have to say that we cannot forget many cultural institutions and organizations have been created by nations in the 19th century and the early 20th century. Many of them involved in colonial, say, projects. And very often, cultural actors try to forget about that, as if cultural policies, we all know, had been institutionalized in the 1950s after the Second World War. Not accurate, not in-depth enough. And the only solution, because again, with Ouafa, I coincide, and let me quote here Mahatma Gandhi, there is no path to peace. Peace is the path. If we want to be constituted as a single humanity, and if we want to make agreements with us and with Mother Earth, we need to have a frame that allows commitments of all, expressions of all, responsibilities of all, nations, cities, civil society. And I believe that this frame is the human rights frame, with cultural rights as very well expressed this morning by Alexandra Shanthaki as a key dimension. I'm not sure I can go further. I think I have no more knowledge to nourish these questions.
No, thanks, Jordi. I think you did quite elegantly address some of the issues around multilateralism and what it should continue to do. I see Pablo's hand up, so perhaps Pablo, can I invite you, and then followed by Ouafa? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I have now the answer, as Jordi says, but I have some things to say. First, we have to remember that the UN system, especially UNESCO's, were designed to build peace. And if we think about the relationship between peace and culture, we have to assume that we have several cultural wars all over the world. Some very big, some others very small. The big ones are that the specific conflicts, as Olesia talked or about the Palestinian conflict, and that those are also cultural wars related to religion or to space. But we have another kind of cultural wars that multilateralism are not taking care of, but they're still there, and we have to have a conversation about the identity wars, about the religion wars, about the gender wars, about the digital wars, about the cancellation culture wars, about the language holocaust that we have that is happening right now in the all over the planet. So this kind of wars are taking place, and many times the multilateral organizations are talking about cultural policies, but we often don't think about that all the conflicts are also always cultural wars. And if the UN, especially UNESCO, were designed to build peace, I don't like this idea of that culture build peace. Maybe we have to think in change the paradox or the paradigm, and the idea, and start to think that in the idea of no culture, no war. That's the thing that I wanted to say.
Thank you, Pablo. Ouafa's got a hand up. Ouafa, over to you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I want to also here add another dimension of challenge we may be facing when we are dealing with putting in place and implementing a campaign toward the post-23 agenda. The diversity comes also with a different level of priorities and needs. And we need to be very cautious how we set this agenda. I mean, one of, for example, of the outcomes of the discussion on the International Mobility Forum we co-hosted with On the Move in Tunisia last May, I think, where we're talking about mobility, artistic mobility, and the environment, and voices from different regions of the world mentioned actually this is not a priority in some global South countries, because we don't pollute. It's not us who is polluting. It's not us who has. So if we put that priority in the agenda, it's very far from my priorities. And I think also in our way to dealing with our common advocacy or our common things, this kind of balancing the different priority, as much as it's, as you mentioned, Jordi, earlier, there is a framework that brings us all together, the human rights. But then when it goes into details and what point, you know, how we do that. And this is also, we find some challenges there. And there's a serious conversation really have to happen so that we keep our front strong and solid there when we go for, you know, for the kind of campaign and influencing. And I think that will really, it's critical to support global campaigns and to support the adherence and the acceptance of all players from all regions in more active, a more engaged way. I think this is something it's worth reflecting on.
Thank you, Ouafa. And I think it kind of nicely ties with something that Pablo also talked about. You know, it really, you know, who are we engaging? I mean, Pablo mentioned about the different kinds of wars that are taking place as we speak in society at multiple levels. Not just only geopolitical wars, but really also, you know, cultural wars and really, you know, identity wars to multiple systems. And you kind of talked about, you know, the need for enduring engagement. And one of the key things that, you know, in all your presentations that seems to emerge, and I'm always kind of reflecting about the fact that maybe sometimes we are all very much the converted who are sitting in this kind of environment, in this, you know, processing these kind of cultural systems and how we see the benefits and the challenges of systems that are multilateral. But how do we create enduring engagement with an emerging generation of artists and communities? And how are they responding to some of these systems? And I'm here perhaps would like to invite Olesya to kind of reflect on how the young people in Ukraine are responding to some of these systems that, you know, clearly because there are multilateral systems that are trying to engage and help and support with what's happening, but how are people responding to those situations?
Am I correct to understand that you are asking how young creators are reflecting their experience living right now in? That's right. Okay, so I'll give you an example about a new exhibit that we are developing in my institution right now. It's going to be called "Coexisting with Darkness." And it's both a reflection to our experience of past winter and a preparation to the next winter. And during the past winter in Ukraine, the Russian troops targeted Ukrainian electricity grid to cut Ukrainian cities of electricity. And winters can be very harsh in our part of the world. So cutting, you know, people off heating and water supply is really crucial. However, even at that situation, we did have very long energy outages and blackouts, but we functioned in different ways. One of the ways to function was so-called points of solidarity, where people could charge their cell phones and just get some hot tea and things like that. And during that time, we also had an exhibit which was called Heart of Earth, and it was focused on the issue of environmental damage that war is doing. And I don't know if you know, but Ukraine is the most mined territory in the world now, to the extent that it's, even if the war stopped right now, it would take another probably 30 to 40 years to demine the territories. And those are also the most fertile territories in the world. So those are the fields that are mined. And this exhibition that I'm talking about was also connected to the food security and how the war in Ukraine is affected very far away communities, people in other places, how everything is connected. But as we had that exhibition last winter, we were facing regular blackouts. So this year, we've invited a young curator, and he invited a number of young artists to reflect on that experience. How do you produce art? How do you continue being an artist without electricity? How do you do an exhibition without electricity heading into new winter? And it's also a reflection, and it's based on the concept, as the curator calls it, he calls it energy solidarity. You have to share energy. So some art pieces in our exhibition will give lighting to other pieces. Some will share the energy that they enjoy with others. And there will be a very complicated engineering model to keep it more or less, the whole exhibition more or less going by itself, even when there are blackouts. So it's both thinking about doing art, and art should be seen, right, with the light. So it needs light. So how do you do art when you are deprived of light? So it's both reflection on that experience, but also preparation for a similar situation that awaits you in a couple of maybe weeks, maybe months. We don't know. And this is one of the models how young creators are doing. It's building on your experience and trying to find solutions. And I'm quite proud of that, I have to tell you.
Thank you, Olesya. I think that's very important, and I think it's also uplifting that the young are also responding, in terms of the exigencies of their time, and are able to also speak to their conditions quite effectively. And in many ways, I think, listening to what you're saying and what Ouafa had earlier said, perhaps the challenge is, is it really about sustainability or is it surviving? Right. And in many ways, the sustainability development versus surviving the development, the emerging developments of what is happening as it unfolds, opens, and how do we then start to look at cultural relations in this regard. But I want to draw from what you've just said to perhaps try to extend the thinking around what might have emerged out of Mondial Cult. And here I go to Pablo, right, in starting to think about how do we start to look at, if there are things that we would do differently, since Mondial Cult that happened in 2022, and the world as we stand now in 2023, if there are things that would be different or reflected upon, are there any reflections that you would like to share with us?
Yes, let me think. Yes, it was a change. A change was just happened with Mondial Cult first, because I firmly believe that Mondial Cult, it wasn't an event, it was a process, and I think that that's the path to follow up, to build not events but processes. Mondial Cult was that, because it just wasn't an encounter between ministers of 150 countries. It was a process of several parallel events, like 47 all over the world, that helped to build the agenda with the participation of many agencies and cultural promoters and cultural agencies that helped to solve how to build Mondial Cult, how to build the final declaration that leaves us also a lot of homework. Let me share some of them. The first one is like we can't think about the future without global and common indicators that help to the countries and the agencies and the cultural agents to understand the value of culture, not just in terms of economy or just in terms of power of the creative sector, but also to give us the tools that help to countries and agencies to convince the governments to put the cultural agenda in the center of policies, as Jordi says a few minutes ago. The second success of Mundiacult, it was to build an agenda that can be set. And that started by thinking that the global conference has to be in a certain period of time. The next one is in 4 years. We have time in that time to build the global goal for culture in the next agenda post 2030. The next Mundiacult will help to set that. And the final thing is the global goal itself. We have a homework to do on that. We said that all over the world that it can't be possible with the participation of all the ecosystem of culture. And the last homework that we understood is like we are not to invent or reinvent the wheel. We have to understand that we have a sustainable problem there, but also we have to understand that in order to not reinvent the wheel, we have to understand that there are good practices all over the world in every corner. And the thing of the project that multilateralist agenda have to build is to understand that we don't have the solution. The solution is still there. So we have to work in how to build a kind of bank of ideas and a new ways of financing that ideas that build a shared net in order to build that good practices in eco boxes that can be replayed in other countries, cities, regions. So that's I think the agenda and the main idea of that Mundiacult leave us. That is the idea of this is not an event. We have to build processes with good practices that in a very little period of short time change in the legislative agenda, in the building of cultural policies from the states, but also in the agenda of the participation of the general society. And I think this is the agenda that Mundiacult leave us with the understanding that we are in a very strange and hard period of the world, because not just we're in a middle. We thought, I remember the start of the COVID. You remember this, they call it the Pax COVID, where everything that seems to be that the cultural change, it will come. We thought that. We feel it. And I still believing in that without recognizing that we have a problem that is incredible for humanity, that we thought about the Pax COVID and the change and the change of culture. And after that, we had the first one terrible war invading Ukraine, and now we have the Palestinian conflict. And it seems that we haven't learned anything. But when we saw the good practices there and the possibilities to share these good practices, I think we have hope. And I think that the way of Mundiacult were built and still, and the next steps to come are good signs, and I'm confident on that.
Thank you, and I think thank you, Pablo, for that that reminder that COVID did bring us all together as humanity in some ways, but somehow we have also forgotten, that moment in time, and now we are much more fractious in the way we go about life, and that's the unfortunate reality we live in. I would like to welcome all our audiences to post in your questions, to our speakers, our panelists. And there's one question to Jordi. Is there an ongoing form of involvement in the Culture 2030 campaign by which actors from civil society and/or academia could join in this initiative? And this question comes from Klinchu Mihaela.
Yes, Mihaela. Yes. Let me first share with you that we are a bit surprised in the campaign by the very positive wording in some meetings, nations meetings, this last 3 or 4 months, especially the G20, the leaders' declaration, which in early September explicitly says the need to analyze feasibility of a cultural goal. This goes in coherence with what it is coherent with what the UN SDG Summit said on 19th September, the BRICS final declaration in August, as well as the European Union Cáceres declaration late September. We, in the campaign, thought that the next months and even 2024, we would have to devote time, our very limited resources, to advocate to states on the importance to discuss potential of standalone goal on culture. It seems that the times have accelerated, and the other day we discussed we need to widen the circles of discussion on the cultural goal with the cultural sector actors and with the non-cultural sector actors, those that I mentioned earlier. And this is something that John Crowley has, the person who drafted the cultural goal proposal for us, has insisted very much. The goal is not likely to exist, the cultural goal is not likely to exist unless other organized constituencies that have a strong legitimacy in the UN system sees that goal as a contribution in their advocacy. And let me take an example with the feminist movement. There is no clause on culture explicit, implicit, yes, everywhere, but not explicit in SDG 5. And everyone in this room would agree that there is a strong, in-depth debate to be seized by cultural actors on the lack of feminism and references in our programs, projects, narratives. So this is something that we have to take it seriously. I can announce that in early 2024, we will convene a 2-hour, 3-hour webinar with everyone interested in discussing the cultural goal proposal. It will be announced. We will introduce our proposal, the one that was released in the frame of Mondiacult, and we will prepare the Summit of the Future, the UN Summit of the Future, September 2024. We would like also to include in this conversation actors that we believe do not belong to civil society, but they represent national agencies, but that are very often in close cooperation with civil society, global civil society. Yes, so in a word, Mihaela and Ouafa, yes.
Thank you very much, Jordi, for it. I mean, I do have a follow-up question for you, but I think I'll hold that, and I want to draw on a point that Ouafa earlier mentioned, and in terms of giving diverse voices an opportunity to also formulate their own systems and approaches to deal with culture. And I think this goes back to a larger enterprise of decolonizing, the way we look at systems and structures, right? And so perhaps, Ouafa, would you like to kind of reflect on, some of the models that might be emerging that in your part of the world, right? That could be a response to, or counterpoint to multilateral systems that are emerging. So it'll be helpful for us to think about, maybe perhaps some of the experiences that are emerging from where you're operating from, which is like North Africa.
I think most of the effort here, the way I see it, is put onto not really on created like mechanism or processes, rather than consolidating our own ways or own capacity to come with proposals, come with solutions. And I think that's the right way. I don't think it's about putting system. It's about empowering ourselves, because the system is what you do about it. If you are powerful enough, you can change it. That's not an issue. The system is just a framework, and it can change, evolve, etc. And I think the real approach is here, concentrate on the way you function, your capacity, empowering ourselves to be able to have the right reflection, be able to put our voices, and be able to advocate for it, be able, empowered to sit in a table and make sure you're heard. Because you can sit in a table just being there to tick the box and legitimize making decision and voting. Enough is enough. And I think the movement now in my region, at least, it's very, very conscious about it. And there is really a strong movement and self-awareness that now we need to concentrate on our capacity and not on the processes and the frameworks. So if there are experience, I mean, a good example I saw, it's really the ecosystem coming together, seeing the solution differently than, like, believing more in small steps than the big, because we don't have the mean to dream big, but we start realizing that even the small steps and the small cases, like how you can survive in an ecosystem where there is no help, there is nobody supporting your sector, come up with a very genuine, innovative idea. And actually now I'm running a study on the African continent on mobility issue. That's not about visa. We're really trying to understand how this mechanism works. What are the local resources that they always overlooked when some study on mobility mapping? Everybody come from the states, the statement and the perception that, okay, our government are not helping, which is absolutely not true. There are ways, but it's, even if it's insignificant, but put it at scale. And I want to just share one very nice example. Comes from Niger. How they come up with solution. They're saying, we don't have that much money. I don't have money to give as much mobility support to the art as I want. But the little I had, I was smart how I use it. So instead of giving individual fund to people to go, they bought a bus. And then when there is an artist who wanted to go in mobility around the neighbor countries, they had the bus. So that investment, it will not become only one shot given to an artist or a collective of artists. They use it and then bring it back to the ministry, and another group can use it again. So this is a very basic, a simple example on how we can refocus, how we can reposition, how we can empower ourselves, so that the discussion, and we are conscious about what are our needs, what is our reality. We cannot start putting point in agenda where our assumptions are built on wrong analysis, like the example of mobility. Yeah, it's not true what I'm doing, and the feedback I'm having and information there is. Given the scale, it's not true to say nothing is being done from local government and local ecosystem, or there is no resources. So I think there is a strong need now to regroup, refocus, re-understand where we stand, what are our capacity, and empower ourselves to be an active and more constructive partner when we sit in multilateral discussions and partnerships.
Thank you very much, Ouafa, for that. And I think attending to that question on the chat, we have, and I want to direct that based on what you have just said, this question to Pablo. And the question being, what can cultural relations organizations do to create more equality and inclusion within sustainable development? I mean, it is a loaded question, because I think Ouafa kind of called into question that the whole idea of the equality matrix and the inclusive matrix that quite powerfully. But again, within organizations, we still endeavor, we continue to engage and with a degree of awareness. So Pablo, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, but I'm seeing that Olesia has her hand
yes, Olesia,
up.
yeah.
And if I give her the floor and then I answer.
Okay, no problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I was actually intending to answer the same question so we can share the question. Now, so what can be done on the local on the level of your community, your country, and your society, right? To promote more perspectives. And this is the question that we've been asking ourselves here, pretty much. And one of the answers that that people in Ukrainian cultural community have come up with is you have to represent your own intellectuals, your own creators, and your own voices more. Because we are one of the societies which used to believe that the great ideas, the great artworks, the great literary pieces, they are somewhere else. And here we can learn from them. And now it's been changing a lot. You have to look inside of your community, artistic community, and inside your scene and give the voice to your own intellectuals and to your own creators as an organization. And second would be to respect your own achievements in different fields, which you sometimes are not aware of, or they seem to you a little bit, small achievements that you do not mention on the larger scale. Now you have to be attentive. You have to look inside of what's in your intellectual and creative communities. And when it comes to multilateral organization, that would be probably one of the solutions to shift that power relations would be to listen more and more attentively to local expertise, which of course echoes what I've just said before from a different perspective. Local expertise can be very deep and multifaceted and very well tailored to a specific living technique, so to say. And also another thing, which is not so obvious, is not to rely on the capital in the way, on the commercial success. This is especially true in the field of visual arts, where commercial success has been important through the past decades. So do not rely on only on what's internationally financially successful, but rather try to again to try to think about original ideas or relevant ideas. Not all the ideas have to be original. That would be my my quick recipe for that.
Thank you, Olesia. Over to you, Pablo. Yeah.
Yeah, the answer is to think about how multilateral agencies can work on culture. First, to understand that if UNESCO is the main area of culture, UNESCO have to work inside with the other areas related to culture. That means artistic education related to education and science. First with UNESCO. Second, with other agencies that the system of UN have to work. I put some examples. The FAO, talking about the cultural, to alimentary or feeding culture. The OMS, to talk about and develop the relationship between culture and culture as an instrument of public health. Or the area of UNESCO that is related to economy, to talk about creative economy. So we have to speak not just to one agency, or as Jordi said, with the movements or the game changers that are heading the global change, as feminist movement, or sustainable movements, or green movements, but also the agencies inside of the UN. And the other part is to think what we can do. Ouafa was talking about mobility. That's one of the main challenges for creative communities. But in the other, we have to fill in the blanks in many things. We have to think ways of share capacitations to help to creators to put them into the economic system. In many countries, as mine, the creative sector goes in and out from the formal sector. And the way of helping that is not just giving money or budget, it's also to giving capacities in order to organize communities, small companies, social companies that help to bring the cultural sector into the formal sector. So we have to fill in the blanks in all the capacitations that we need to build in that. The other thing is to visibilize the power of the creative and sector is huge, and sometimes we're seeing like the little brother of the development. When if we see the numbers that, for example, UNESCO give us, I think $2.8 billion a year. So the creative sector is bigger than the automotor sector. And sometimes we feel that we're very little. We're not little, we are huge, but we are like disconnected. So we have a lot of homework to do in order to fill in the blanks. And the last thing I want to say, we always think about the thing is we need budget. No, that's the final question. All the sector are always asking of that, and maybe we should start to think how to talking about sustainability, but also in an economic way, how to build sustainable communities of the creative sector that make them not depend from the grants from the government, using them also, but we have to start to think the cultural policies, and I end with that, because if we see the tendency of the last century, we build the offer, the support to artists, the museums, the cinemas, the libraries, the cultural centers, sometimes the support directly to the artist, but we need the other half. And the other half is what we have to do with public readers, book readers, assistance to the museums, assistance to the theater, what we have to do with the other half. And that's a main and a huge challenge for multilateral organizations, because these challenges are related specifically with citizens, with the other part where that are the main source of oxygen for artists and creators. And we have to work on that path.
Thank you very much, Pablo. I'm very mindful of time. We've got 2 more minutes to go. So I'm going to do a rapid round, starting with Ouafa, who's got a hand up. And perhaps Ouafa, in responding, you want to also respond. And this is a question I'm going to ask all of you to respond in 30 seconds, which is, what can cultural relations organizations do to create a more peaceful society in the middle of increasingly conflictive or diversified world? What can cultural organizations do in an increasingly conflictive or diversified world? So perhaps, Ouafa, we'll start with you, and everyone do a quick 30 to 45-second response to that. We'll start with Ouafa, please.
Thank you. I just want for 10 seconds reflect on the idea of inclusion and do no harm. And I want to build on what Ulicia was saying. Part of the answer is yes, lean more into local expertise and know-how, but the how also, how to lean is as critical as that. Meaning that if you come and support in an ecosystem and you implement directly, like, okay, you call the local expert and you get their advice, but the credit of designing, implementing, and the result from that action goes to you as an external to that ecosystem, you're doing harm, not help, because you're preventing the emergence in that ecosystem of people who can position on that know-how and then can take the lead on that. So if you are an XYZ institute operating in Tunisia and you come up with a huge program to support the CCI ecosystem in Tunisia, you call the local experts and they help you design and they train and they do, but at the end, the implementing is you, XYZ institute. At the end, the expert and the person who know how to do it is that XYZ institute, not the local actor. So that now on the other point, on the piece, I think the most important, and I've taken this from example, what we're living right now in the Gaza crisis. I think the most important role we could do in such very tense is be the voice of the reason, feel both sides, understand the feeling and the emotion for both sides, because denying the emotion, whether they are legitimate or not, that's another second thing. I think the emotions are very vive. And what art and culture could do, and cultural organization, is create that safe ground that both can express that pressure, express that pain. Both are called and pushed to be reasonable and try to understand, and to understand at least that we're going nowhere if we go in the wrong direction in the violence and conflict. And the art is an amazing medium. Music is something that could immediately, you see the reaction, you put on music, you immediately go down the tension. And that's what art is, what the creative sector could do, and create that environment and atmosphere to say, okay, just take 5 minutes, 5 seconds to feel the other and try to be as reasonable as you can. But of course, that's idealistic when we're in such context. But I think I'm talking from experience. I think being the voice of the reason and helping both calm down and try to talk.
Thank you, Ouafa. Jordi, 30 seconds.
Yes, even less. I agree with what Ouafa says. Stop the war. Feel empathy with, say, everyone, and the narrative that our wounds, our injuries are worse than yours. Try to go in depth, and with the help of mediators and peace builders, try to feel we belong to the same humanity, and go step by step. But stop the war.
Thank you, Jordi. Alessia.
Well, let me say that you can stop the war if you are the aggressor. Then you can just stop. If you are the one who is under attack, it's not so simple. What I also need to tell you is that culture is a double-sided sword. It can be healing, but it can be also toxic. So we have to be aware of that very, very much, and make an effort in understanding that and in reflecting that in our activities. One of the ways how you can be rather healing the toxic, even though it's not simple as well, is to be on the side of justice. And justice is in the core of any peacemaking. There is no sustainable peace without justice. It will, the problem will arrive again if there is no justice. And you do it. How are you on the side of justice? You do it intellectually through thinking and reflecting. But again, that does not equal stopping the war if you are not the aggressor.
Thank you, Alessia. And Pablo, your 30 seconds, please.
I prefer to keep with Alessia just have said, but maybe with a phrase of Claro Levy, that is to say that the future have an ancient heart, and I believe sincerely that that heart is culture. And it's time not just to talk about culture, it's time to talk about cultures in plural.
Thank you very much, Pablo. So on behalf of ICRRA, I would like to really thank, in no particular order, Ouafa, Belgacem, Olesia, Jordi, and Pablo for this really wonderful and really engaging and enlightening conversation and discussion. Lots to reflect on, lots to take away, and in ICRRA we will definitely follow up on many of these talking points that you've got. The power of art is really, to also provide that internal personal transformation. And we have to do inner transformation before we can transform our communities and transform the world. And hopefully, we will all lead that way. And cultural relations is really, as one of you earlier mentioned, is a process, it's a proxy in many ways. And it's continuously in practice and it has to be, evidenced through the lived practice of the many cultures, many conditions and many contexts in which we all exist. And there are challenges abound, and peace is often something that we are continuously pursuing and chasing in our endeavor. So with that, I'll call this a panel discussion to a close. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the audience for joining us for this session. Really, once again, thank you for this fantastic opportunity to ICRRA to present the conversations around the role of organizations within, multilateral organizations within, a changing environment in a post SDG 2030 environment. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, have a good evening, have a good morning from wherever you are. Thank you and have a good day.